This tutorial is in response to a comment that was left on one of my videos. And the comment was a request that I make a video showing how to create a Candy Crush style life system where the lives were automatically regenerated after a set period of time. And that's such a good topic to look at because a lot of games are life based or energy based or stamina based. Call it whatever you want. A lot of games have when the player loses a turn or does an action, the game will take a unit of currency away from the player, and then after a period of time, the unit of currency will be regenerated. So that's a great topic to look at because it's probably of interest to a lot of people. And another reason it's a great topic to look at is I've already made one tutorial on how to use time in GDevelop, and I was wanting to make another tutorial on how to use time in GDevelop, and this is a perfect example of that topic, how to use time. So this is just a really good tutorial for me. So I'm really grateful for the idea. That was fantastic. So let's go over the features of our little system here. And one of the features is if the timer is counting down and the player uses more lives, it doesn't interrupt that timer that was going for that first life that was being regenerated. It just keeps on going, makes that life, goes on to regenerate the next one, and so on. And the second feature of this system is super important. When the player puts the game in the background so that their energy can refill while they go do something else. Like right now, my preview is in the background, and when my preview is in the background, it stops. It goes into a pause state. So if your player puts their game in the background, there's a big possibility their system will pause it. And with the logic we have set up here, it doesn't matter if it's paused or not. As soon as the player brings that game back into the foreground, our logic tells it how many hearts it should have and filled in the amount of time that the game was paused. Okay, so that's feature number 2 of our system that we have going on here. And feature number 3 of our system is, of course, our save events. And that way the player can exit the game and be gone however long they want. And whenever they open the game again, our logic goes through and sees how many hearts or how many lives should have regenerated in the time the player was gone, and it regenerates them so that the player comes back and they have however many lives they should have. So that's the features of our system. Let's get started creating it. I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop. I'm going to call it Auto Life Regen. I'm just going to copy my path here and drag my assets in. Now, the assets I made in Inkscape, nothing special. You can just find yourself like a heart asset or maybe a lightning bolt if you wanted to do more of an energy theme. And I have 2 buttons. Actually, 1 button with 2 animations, an idle and a pressed. And then I have a little background for my timer. So that's all the assets you need. And I can put these on itch.io with the completed project, but I really don't think anyone needs these exact assets to follow along with this tutorial. So now let's go into GDevelop and just hit Control-Alt-N, bring up your new project menu, and I'm going to call mine Auto Life Regen. And I'm just going to paste my path in there. And I am going to set mine to mobile portrait. I'm going to create my project. I'm going to go into my properties. And go ahead and write your author name real quick. I'm going to check my resolution. I'm going to uncheck update. And I am going to put it to no changes to the game size. That's irrelevant to our tutorial, so you can do that however you want it. It doesn't matter. Okay, on our scene, I'm going to rename mine to main. And I'm going to reopen that scene. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to change my background to the color I wanted, which was 247, 202, and 237. Okay, next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add a sprite, and I'm going to add the heart PNG. And I'll just call it lives. I'm going to apply it and I'm going to drag that onto my scene somewhere. And I'm going to add a text box for my heart, and I'm just going to call this one lives text. Since my heart is big, I'm going to make it 80. And the color, I'll do white. I will bold it, and I'm just going to put 5 because 5 is the maximum amount of life I want the player to have. So I'm just going to put that onto my heart somewhere. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is set up a piece of logic to tell GDevelop that I want to set this text box right here. I want it to display the number of lives that the player currently has. Okay, so let's go add an event. Just hit Shift A, Shift W, get your event group out, and for this event we're going to call it lives text setting. Okay, and the first thing we're going to want to do is hit lives text, and we're going to compare the text. We're going to look at what that text says. And we're going to say if it's not equal to what, let's make a variable. We'll say global variable. You can make yours a scene variable if you'd rather do scene variable. I'm going to do a global in this tutorial. So make a global variable. And remember, we want this one right here that's a number. So when we hit it, it's going to say toString. So don't freak out about that. That's just meaning that this number, it's comparing it to something that's a text, okay? So that is a number variable right there. So the variable we want to name is called life. So we're creating a variable called life. But we want that variable to be inside of another variable. And the other variable is going to be our main variable that we're going to put in our save events. That's why we want our life variable to be inside of that. So let's call our main variable stats. That'll be our structure. And then dot and then life. And life is the name of the variable we're comparing here. So if our text box, if this is displaying a number that is not equal to our global variable life that is in our structure stats, then we're going to lives text, we're going to modify that text, we're going to set it to, go ahead and hit OK, and we could just copy this and paste it here. We're going to set it to our global variable. I hate it when it does that. Our global variable stats.life. Okay, so let's check out our logic, and it should be 0 because even though we just made this variable called life in this structure called stats, our life doesn't have any value right now. We didn't assign it a value, so it's 0. Okay, so the next thing let's take care of, let's give our players some lives to start playing with. So go ahead and hit Shift W, get your event group out, and then hit Shift A. Get out of your event group before you hit Shift A. And then we're going to call this one setup. I'm going to drag it first, and I'm going to put beginning of scene. So at the beginning of scene, I want to start the player out with 5 lives. I'm going to say they never played before, so I want them to have 5 lives. So we'll change the value of our global variable. Value of a global variable And this is the one we want. We don't want string of a global variable. We want this one because value is the number. String is the letter. So our variable, once again, was stats.life. We're going to set that to a value, and we're going to set it to the value 5, the maximum number of lives I'm allowing them to have. So now when we preview it, we should see that our text box is displaying 5. So the next thing we're going to need is a way to make that text box stop displaying 5. So let's add our button objects. I'm going to add a sprite. I'm going to call this sprite play button. And I'm going to add both my animations. I'm going to add my idle animation, and I'm going to add my pressed animation. And I'm just going to drag this out onto the scene somewhere. Okay, so with this button, I'm going to want to do two things. And number one, I'm going to want it to change animations because I do have an idle and a pressed. So that's one thing I want to do. The second thing I do, every time I click it, I want it to subtract one number from the value of lives my player has. Okay. So let's go ahead and set up an event group for that. Hit Shift A, and it helps when you highlight the one you're wanting. But anyway, and then hit Shift W, get your event group, and this event group, we are going to call this, since we want to do two things, we want to change the button animation, and we want to subtract a number from our life. We're going to call it both of those. Button animation. And subtracting life. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to want to do, when I press my mouse on this button, I want it to change to the second animation, which will be animation 1. So, add my condition, pressed, and it's going to be mouse button pressed or touch held. I'm going to choose the left button. Okay, let me add a sub event. Just going to drag under, and this one I'm going to say cursor, and the cursor is on an object. The object is play button. Then what do I want to do? I want to change the animation. So actually I could have done that the easy way. Play button, change animation, set to 1. Okay, and since I can keep pressing my mouse down and it will keep changing it to 1, I'm just going to make a fake trigger once here. I'm going to say play button current animation does not equal 1. So mouse down on the play button and the animation isn't already on 1. I'm going to change that animation to 1. And now that works perfectly, but since we're dealing with a computer and we've told it to change the animation, we've got to tell it when to change it back. So let's just copy this event right here, and we'll just paste it right in there, and we'll just go ahead and drag this out a little. Okay, so for this one, instead of touch or left mouse button down, we're going to say mouse released, and it's already going to be set to our primary left button. And since this is a mouse released event, we don't need this animation thing here because a mouse release doesn't need trigger once, and it doesn't need fake trigger once events because it is a trigger once event. So we're just going to say mouse released, cursor on play button. We will change the animation of the button and we'll set it to 0. So now our logic for clicking the button should work. Alright, so now we just need to subtract 1 from the value, the variable where we stored the value of life that our player has. So let's go ahead and add that to our mouse released event. And we're just going to say global, the value of a global variable. Ours was life and it was in stats. So stats.life, and we'll say subtract 1. And now let's go test and see what that does. And it's working, but not quite as we intended. It's going into the negatives. So instead of subtracting 1, let's put a clamp on this. And how we're going to put a clamp on this, instead of subtract here, we're going to say set to. And we're going to type clamp. Clamp with the lowercase c. Don't do what I always do and put a capital C and then wonder why you're getting errors in your ID. So hit this clamp right here, and as you see, restrict the value to a given range. You need a number, then you need a minimum number and a maximum number. So go ahead and hit clamp, and let's give it, our number will be our global variable stats.life minus 1. Okay, that's our number. So whatever our global variable stats.life is now, we're going to minus 1 from that. So our minimum number, the very minimum we want this to go is 0. So we're going to go ahead and press 0. And now put another comma. And the very maximum number it can possibly be is 5. So we're going to put 5. Okay? So when the mouse is on the play button and it's released, we're going to change the animation, and we're going to change the variable stats life. That's how many lives our player has. We're going to set it to the current number of stats life minus 1. Minimum value can only be 0. Maximum can only be 5. So now when we run it and we're pressing this button, we're never going to get below 0. Okay? Now, that works because the only time we're changing this value, like we didn't really need the 5 there. I just put it there because it's required. Because our other events are going to set the maximum value and not let it go over the 5. So we only needed the minimum value there, really. But, I mean, we had to have a space for a 5, so I put the 5 there too. But if there was any other events in your game, like besides pushing the button, also some other event could subtract 1 from this, then you would need to move this clamped action somewhere out here where it didn't have a condition, so it could check all the time. That way, if something else was happening in the game that also subtracted values from the life, it would still be clamped at 0. Because how we have this logic set up, if something else was happening in the game that was subtracting life, it could still go into the negatives until we hit this button. And then once we hit that button, it would set it back to 0, because we would be clicking the button and we would be like, oh wait, it's only supposed to be at 0 is the minimum. So that's where our clamp is. So I'm just pointing out, if you had different events, you would probably need to move that clamp out somewhere else where it's on its own. And I'll actually be showing you an example of that later in the game. In the logic. So now that we have that set up and it is minusing correctly, now what's the next thing we need to do? We need to tell it if our player's amount of life falls beneath or below the maximum amount of life we have, which is 5, then we need to start keeping track of time. Okay? So let's go make a condition to tell it to start keeping track of time. Okay, I just realized this was on pause, and I'm not really sure how long, because I guess the pause button is set up to something I hit a lot when I'm typing. I'll have to change that later. But I think we were just done discussing our play button, our clamping action, and we were saying the next thing we needed to do was when this value falls below our maximum life value, We need to start keeping track of time. So we made a new event group, and I'm calling this Refill Life. And we're gonna say, first we'll just say, if our life value falls below 5. So global value of a global variable stats.life is less than 5. Okay, so that's the event we're going to use to trigger our logic to start keeping track of time. If our value is already on 5, if our life is full, we never need to keep track of time. We only need to start keeping track of time when this value falls below 5. So our event to trigger keeping track of time will be our player's value of life falls below our maximum life of 5. Okay? So we'll make a new event and we'll pull that under. And now we want to tell it to start keeping track of time. So if you have watched my previous video on using time in GDevelop, you must forgive me if I just go over a few quick things here. So let's go ahead and change our global variable. Put global value of a global variable, and we're about to make a new variable. And we need to save this variable too, so we're going to put it in that same structure that we have our lives variable in. And this variable, we're going to call it time. So put stats.time, and we are going to set it to, and now just type time. And the very first option here is time with the word string in parentheses. That's the one we want. And now in the parentheses, just type double quotes twice. Double quote, double quote. And you're going to see all these options put up. And now's where I'll start repeating myself. I say pretty much the same thing in my first video. Every game or every project I have done in GDevelop so far, except for the quick one I did for a game jam, uses time. And the value of time I always use of all these options is timestamp. Because timestamp, I really enjoy working with timestamp. It's super simple to use. Timestamp returns the current date, the current time in a long string of milliseconds. So right now we have it set up that when our global variable right here, life, falls below our maximum life, we're going to change our variable stats time, and we're going to set it to timestamp. So real quick, I'm just going to show you what timestamp looks like. So let's go ahead and change our value of time and run our debugger real quick. And here's what our timestamp looks like. We have our variable called stats, and in it we have our life variable and our time variable. And this is what timestamp looks like. It's just one long number, and these are milliseconds. And that makes it super easy to work with, because it is very easy for us to get the value of the time we want in seconds. So say I wanted, you could do this with the calculator. I'm just saying it's really simple to do it in your head too. Say I wanted something to, say I wanted the hearts to refill every 15 minutes. Well, what's 15 minutes in milliseconds? Well, all you have to do is know what 15 minutes in seconds is, and then add 3 zeros to that. Because if something is 5 seconds, then you add 3 zeros to that to get milliseconds, and it would be 5,000 milliseconds equals 5 seconds. So 15 minutes in seconds, super easy. You know that 60 seconds are in a minute, so that means 600 minutes are in 600 seconds are in 10 minutes. If 600 seconds is in 10 minutes, then 300 seconds is in 5 minutes, which means 15 minutes is 900 seconds, And to get the value of milliseconds, you just add 3 zeros to that. So, and you can also do it with a calculator if the values get very large, like if you're running into days, you know. But, or Google. Google is your friend. But anyway, bottom line, it's super easy to deal with time in milliseconds. And that's why I always use timestamp in my projects. It's just so extremely easy. So if you'll notice one thing now, though, let's go check our debugger again. The last 4 digits of this millisecond number is 4235. Okay? And now it's 8218. Refresh that again and it's 2189. So what's happening is that the only condition we have here to make our variable time, to change it and set to the timestamp, which remember, timestamp is the current time now in milliseconds. The current day, the current time, the current year in milliseconds. So the only condition we have set up is that our life be less than the global variable life. So this whole time right now, it is changing that our time variable, and it's setting it to the current time over and over and over. Okay? And that's not very helpful for us. That would be helpful if we were making a clock and we wanted to know what time it is now. But we're trying to keep track of time. And we can't keep track of time if we keep changing the time to the current time it is now. So we need to add one more condition besides this. And that way, when we keep track of this time, this will just make it do it one time. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if our global variable, value of a global variable, and that was the new one we made in our variable called stats, and that was stats.time, if it is equal to 0. Go ahead and apply that. So now there's 2 conditions. The first, this one right here, triggers our logic to start keeping track of time. As soon as our player's life value falls below the maximum life, our logic will start keeping track of time now. And this right here, we tell it to only change our variable time if that time was already at 0. Because if it's not at 0, it means we've already written a value there. And if we've written a value there, it means we're already keeping track of time and we don't need to keep writing a new value there, okay? So now let's check our debugger real quick. We'll refresh it. And we'll see the last 4 digits, 9778. Let's go to hit our game so we can refresh it again, and still 9778. So now our logic for that is working. When our life falls below the maximum value, the maximum life of 5, then we trigger our keeping track of time event. And we say, hey, if we're not already keeping track of time so that this is 0 instead of anything else, then we need to write the current time it is now right here. Okay? Okay, so now I'm going to show you, using timestamp, how very simple it is to set the length of time you want something to happen. Okay, so a lot of people come in, I think, with an idea that dealing with time is hard because first you have to set the time it is now, and then you have to figure out how much time you want it to run, then you have to calculate how much time it would be, and then you have to subtract this and add that and divide this. But really all you have to do is you have to know when the action happens, you get the current time now, and you add the length of time you want it to last. So, going by that, let's go ahead and open this up so you can see better. When my value first falls below my life value first falls below the maximum life, I want to tell it, hey, 5 seconds from now, fill that life that just fell below again. Okay? So let's write that. In 5 seconds, remember, anytime we write a second in milliseconds, we just add 3 zeros. And we do need to write it in milliseconds because we're about to add it to our timestamp. So we'll say 5000. So that's 5,000 milliseconds plus time. And then do your double quote, and go ahead and pick out timestamp. Okay, so now we're saying as soon as this value changes and falls below the maximum life that we can have, to set our variable time in stats, set it to the current time plus 5,000 milliseconds. Because what is now plus 5 seconds? That means it's 5 seconds from now. So we're basically saying, if you set this to an hour, you'd be like, set the time to now plus an hour from now. That's when I want this done. Okay? So now that we have it set up, that we're keeping track of time, now we got to do it. We have to tell it what happens when it reaches this time. And remember, what is this time? This is 5 seconds from now. Because this is 5 seconds, and we're adding it to what? We're adding it to right now. Okay? So now we need to tell it, now that we've added 5 seconds plus now, what do we do in 5 seconds from now? Okay, so let's go tell it what to do in 5 seconds from now. Let's go ahead and add our event group. And actually, let's add let's shift W. We're going to get a while event going on. This is a while loop. And while whatever we put in here is true, it's going to do these things here. Okay? Okay, so let me drag this under as a sub-event. It's got to be a sub-event. Because if it's right here, it's a separate event. It's not part of this while event. So this needs to be a sub-event. So what condition do I want to be true? Well, I need to tell it if the current time that I'm living in now is greater than the time I set 5 seconds ago, to add 1 to my life, right? Because I said, like, if now is greater than 5 seconds, if now is not greater than 5 seconds from now, if it's only like 1 second from now, then don't do it. So, while these conditions are true, let us get our global variable, value of a global variable, stats time, and we're going to say, is it less than time? You want that one that says string, double quote, pick out timestamp. So what are we saying? We are saying whatever value we set in time, which was the current time at the time we set it, plus the length of time we wanted it to happen, we're going to look at the current time now and see if this value is less than the current time now. Because if this value is less than the current time now, then whatever we wanted to do here is done. Okay? So it's that simple. So once we have it established that we set the time now plus 5 seconds or however much long we want, then we look at the clock. We're constantly looking at the clock and saying, hey, is the time now bigger than that time we set a while ago? Now, when it is, we want to add 1 to our stats life, okay? Oh, so we need global variable, value of a global variable, and that was stats.life. And we want to set to, no, we want to add 1. Sorry, we don't want to set it to 1. That would only make a lot of people mad, okay? And so then also, because we're in a loop, we want to check if we need to do that again. So let's copy this and paste this. So now we're saying start keeping track of time if our value fell below 5 the first time. So that only happens if your value ever falls to 4. After that, you no longer keep telling it to keep resetting the time in that way. Now we're going to tell it to set the time in our while loop, okay? And we're going to say, if this value we set here is less than the current time now, then we need to add 1 to our life, and then we need to check, we need to change our variable stats time and set it to 5,000, which is 5 seconds. 5,000 milliseconds plus the current time now. So that way, if they're down more than 1 life, it will add 5 more seconds and it will check again. Now, I've intentionally left 2 errors in here because I think it will help illustrate this logic to you in such a way that you're just going to be like, immediately grasp it. So let's cover the first error first. And the first error is this right here. What we're changing our next timestamp to be. And let's just go look. Let's see first of all if our logic's working correctly. If 5 seconds from now, it's going to add a new life for us. And it did. So now when we subtract a life, it starts our counter and it sets it to 5 seconds in the future. And then when it gets to 5 seconds in the future, it changes the value. So far, so good. So what's wrong with our logic? The way we have programmed this or put our logic in here, this is what I would call a one-off time event. There is nothing wrong with doing this if what you want to happen is a one-time thing, okay? A one and done. And you would not need that in a while loop either. Because it would be a one and done. It's not something that you would need to repeat. An example of a one and done would be a 24-hour bonus, okay? You only want the player to get that bonus every 24 hours. You don't want the player to be gone a week from the game and to be able to come back and collect 7 bonuses all at once. You would want to set that logic up to where it checks to see if 24 hours has passed or more has passed since the last time the player checked that bonus. It doesn't care. You don't care if it was 36 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. As long as at least 24 hours had passed, you want them to be able to collect that reward. But you want to then start the new 24-hour timer from right there, from right where they collected that reward, which would be the current timestamp. So this would be the logic used for that. Another example would be the player grows some wheat, okay? They plant some wheat in their field, and the wheat's done in 7 hours. You don't want them coming back in 14 hours and being able to harvest wheat twice, right? You would only want them to come back and for your logic to see, hey, should that wheat be done now? Yes. Well, then I will make that thing happen once, and then I'll add 7 more hours to the current time now when the player's checking it. Okay, so this is perfect logic for that. It just doesn't work for what we're doing because we need a logic that's making more than one thing because more than one life might be gone. They might have used all 5 of their lives and they might need them all to be regenerating. So that's why we're putting ours in a loop when this logic does not need to be in a loop, the one and done thing. Okay? This logic will need to be in a loop and we won't be able to set it to timestamp because look at what happens when we set it to timestamp. We are saying when our value first falls below the maximum life, to start keeping track of time and to add 5 seconds from the current time now. And if the player leaves the game and comes back a week later, it's going to see these events right here, and it's going to say, oh yeah, the time a week later that the player came back is bigger than the time we set it over here. So now we're going to come down and do this logic, and we're going to add 1 to life, and then we're going to go to the current time now, which is a week later, and now add 5 seconds to see when we should fill our next life, our life number 2. And meanwhile, the player's like, I've been gone for a week and I've only gained 1 life. Okay, so that's actually how we have it set up now. And that just won't do. And for example, like I have this on pause in the background. So we can just wait a few seconds and then go look. If we waited 15 seconds, we should come back and have 3 hearts full. But we're not going to because we don't have the correct logic for that right here. Okay, so probably 15 seconds has gone by, and sure enough, we only have 1 heart full. Okay, so that's the first error with this. This kind of logic is good when you're just wanting the event to happen once and reset from the current time the player comes, whether it was a day later, a week later, whatever. What we need to do though, because we need to refill any of the lives that were taken. If he's down 3 lives, we need to refill all of them, and we need to refill them based on the time that we first started keeping track of time. Okay? So we need to say, if what value we set here is less than the current time now, we need to add 1 heart to stats life, and we need to change the global variable stats time. We need to set it to the next length of time we want, which is another 5 seconds or 5,000 milliseconds, plus the value that we already had stored right here, because this was where that event should have started, right here. Okay? So instead of setting our new 5 seconds to the current time now, we need to set it to the value we already had stored in our time, because that's the correct time that it should have happened. That way when we come back a week from now, we're not looking to see, okay, we'll set the 5 seconds to the current time now, and is now, no, of course it's not. Is now greater than now plus 5 seconds now. We need to set it to the time it should have been done in the first place. And then check that, and we would see, yeah, this still is less than that. So we would come and do it again and see this still is less than that. So we would come and do it again, okay? So we're just going to change this one right here, and we're going to set that to, this time, 5 seconds plus our global variable. And that's in our structure called stats, and it is time. Okay,